Hello all, welcome one and all to our Theatre Talks with very special guests Ian, Michael and Chris Isaacs. My name is Aaron McCann. I'm the West Australian Chair of the AWG. First, the Guild would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to welcome all AWG members and non-members who are joining us this evening. This event will be recorded and will be up on Facebook later for you to put your comments out. Also, from wherever you are around the country, please let us know down in the comment section in the Q&A where you're from, and we'll hopefully be able to say hello as we go through. And please feel free to put any questions that you have to our guests in the Q&A and I'll address them throughout the evening. A little bit of housekeeping. We'd ask that everyone keep their mics on mute in the background, just in case, until we get to our Q&A session at the end of the talk. And again, leave your questions and we'll get to them soon. So first up, our guests. Ian Michael is a proud Wilman-Noongar man born in Darwin and raised in Bunbury. He's a graduate from the Whopper School of a great many actors coming from WA. As an actor and theatre maker, he has highlights which include Let the Right One In, Heart, Big Day Out, Black Cabaret, The Kid. His film credits include Where Are the Warriors and Needle. In 2013 and 2015, Ian was awarded the most outstanding Indigenous artist at the Melbourne Fringe Festival, and Ian is currently a resident, an artist resident in Perth's Black Swan Theatre Company. Chris Isaac is a multiple award-winning writer, deviser, performer, and founding artist of The Last Great Hunt. He has worked and performed nationally and internationally. Chris co-wrote with Jeffrey J. Fowler and performed in companion pieces Bali and Fagstag. Fagstag went on to an award-winning session in Melbourne, Adelaide, and Edinburgh, winning the prestigious Fringe First Award in 2017, and he is a graduate of the Black Swan Emerging Writers Program and is also a resident artist there. They're both currently working on a new production called York. So welcome, Ian and Chris.
Hello. Hello, thanks, Aaron.
No worries, thank you so much for being here with us today. So I guess first up, how are you both right now with the current state of things? How is it looking for you guys as theatre devisers and creators?
There's no getting around it that it's been a weird year for a lot of people in a lot of industries, and theatre particularly. Right now I'm feeling really good. I feel good today. I was talking to Ian before. We had, there's awesome festival on in Perth, where we both are. So, and in acknowledgements, we'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation from where we're talking from, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present. The awesome festival's happening, and it's a really great chance to see people kind of back involved in live performance in Perth. And so I'm quite optimistic at the moment. Touch wood, but it's been a hard year, and it feels like we've worked through a lot. But right now, I'm in a good place.
Yeah. Feeling very much the same, I think. We went through a brief lockdown period and we came out of that, and we've started working on a bunch of opportunities and things and developments as well. The world is starting to come back out over here, so feeling good about things at the moment, but yeah, can't help but acknowledge that there are still people who are going through a lot of tough times. But yeah, feeling good at the moment.
Well, I guess let's sort of take it back to a little bit earlier in the year. Obviously everyone had stuff that you guys were working on, and a lot of those things would have fallen through or maybe been pushed back a lot later. Can you kind of talk us through, I guess, what was kind of going through your head at that time? How did you kind of re-navigate what you were working on, knowing that a lot of venues you couldn't perform there, or you couldn't work in tight-knit groups as you normally would?
Yeah, oh gosh, this is where to begin. I think the first thing was every theatre company in the country essentially had the choice of, do you try and push through, or do you cancel, and when do you cancel, and what seasons do you just write off, and what seasons do you look to postpone. In terms of the work on York, which was going to be a show or a season this year at Black Swan, Black Swan as a company took the view of they had contracts with actors and performers, and they had contract agreements with designers. And instead of cancelling those altogether, to recognise that those positions and those agreements of payment were very important for people. I mean, as artists, when you know you've got a show on, or when you know you have something coming up, 4 weeks, 5 weeks rehearsal, that you plan your life around that. And so for that to be taken away would have been devastating for a lot of the artists involved with the company and with the show. So what we ended up doing for York specifically was 4 weeks that were going to be put aside for the rehearsal into the production became, for us, 4 weeks of a development on the script with the actors and the cast and the designers. Other examples of things was another Black Swan show got turned into a digital product. Other theatre companies made digital products or did online play readings of rehearsals with the look at having the play come back next year. So there was a lot of real quick pivot to digital work, as well as reimagining what we could do to try and keep people in jobs, really.
Yeah. I was performing in a season of Cloud Street. That was in the Perth Festival. And, that show was such a big show, and we were in such a bubble of as a cast and as a team on that show. And we kind of started hearing about the possibilities of lockdown towards the end of the season. And they were announcing the lockdown restrictions kind of 3 days before we were about to finish the show. And luckily we were able to close that show and end it the day before lockdown.
Yeah, Monday.
Yeah, the day after closing. And so we were hearing from the company, we were observing what was happening in the world. It was a very strange time. We were unsure whether or not we were going to come back to a theatre. I think the last couple of shows of Cloud Street, there were people who weren't coming, but then there were a bunch of people who were buying tickets because we didn't know when theatre was going to happen again. And so that appreciation of audience performer relationship was really lovely. And the leadership, I think, from Claire Watson and Rick Heath and the Black Swan team to postpone a whole year of theatre was a really brave one and a hard decision. But I think it meant, like Chris said, all of those contracts, the decisions to honour those contracts meant that, some artists get one show a year. And so to have that income taken away, to have that opportunity taken away would have been really devastating. So I am completely admire the decision that they made to postpone, which meant that not just contracts got honoured, but all of the new work that was to go on this year had developments or other kind of developments in rooms, on Zooms, creative developments, design developments. So it was kind of a really great opportunity for new work to have time to grow, to speak to the world that was happening, to even hear how people in those development rooms were feeling about the world and the work. And so it was hard, but it was rewarding, I think, for York.
So rewarding.
Having
how did your development sort of strategy change from moving to a physical space to an online space, or didn't it change at all?
No, we were lucky.
Yeah, so by the time York was in the development period, which was in July. In July, we were able to be in the same room with the actors. So we had that experience with, in a room with people. And I think because of the content of York and what the play is, it would have been very difficult to do online. There's a real personal heaviness and weight around telling stories about the history of Australia's past. That intimacy of being in the same space was really important. I did developments online as a writer, and you were in on Cherry Orchard, which was another Black Swan show that got a development, and that was online. So,
yeah, that was 6 weeks of Zooms.
Yeah.
Right.
And I developed something with The Last Great Hunt as a writer online too for 3 weeks, and so a play that was going to be on it as well this year. So they were hard, and your strategies change really, really quickly. So the main thing I think about the Zoom thing that we found very early on in Zooms is that you just can't sustain a day online, and that it's okay to only do an hour or 2 hours and then people to go away. And there are some really good things about the way Zoom, because of the quality of sound and you can't talk over each other, breaks down the conversation around the work to being very specifically only what's important. You don't, as someone who is working on Zoom on a play or thinking about things, I'd have an idea or a thought, but if it's irrelevant, don't butt in, don't interrupt people. And so the kind of politeness of conversation on Zoom is really good. But the counter to that is, you know, you miss those side conversations, you miss the in-jokes, you miss the little tangents of story, you miss the coffee breaks together, you miss all the holistic stuff that happens when building a team in workshopping a play. And theatre specifically, as a writing practice goes, it's very collaborative, and the writers have a role in it, but it's a conversation with actors and directors and designers and eventually audience. So you need to do it with other people.
Yeah, and theatre is made to be with other people.
Yeah.
It's to feel the energy. I think something I discovered in comparison to a Zoom development to one in a room was that you couldn't feel somebody's energy.
Yeah.
You couldn't feel how somebody was feeling during that day. And I think particularly during that time was really hard because people were going through some really tough things. And so to not even be able to just feel that energy or feel that vibe from somebody was really hard. But I think in person having that development, we very much were aware that people had been going through a lot and our actors had the same as everybody else being stuck in lockdown, and we were feeling like we treaded very lightly in that development. We always checked in with people, just making sure how they're going. And the wonderful thing that came out of that time was being able to go to York, the actual place that the play is set in and around and about, and do lots of cultural and community consultancy, and as a team do that. And that's something you don't get very often in new work and new commissions, is to spend a time in the place with everybody that you're working with. And we got a lot of time to do that, and that was really good.
Well, I guess for everyone who's not from WA, I guess explain a little bit of like where York is, and probably with more context to what the play is about.
Yeah, so York is the first inland settlement town of Western Australia. It's about 90 kilometres-ish from east of Perth. It's on Balladong Noongar country. And it has a particularly vicious history. As one of the first inland towns, it was at the forefront of colonial wars and the invasions. And there are massacres around York, but there are massacres everywhere in Australia. But not only that, the history of York post that point went through periods of, returning soldiers, gold frontier diggers. It was the sort of stopping point before people went off for the gold rush in the east of Perth, the kind of goldfields region. And then in the 80s, particularly, there was this old hospital that had stories of hauntings from it, and the kind of mythical history around it of schools going there for camps and being haunted. And so it's an epic work in the sense that it branches across 200 years of time and tells 4 different sort of sections of the events around this town from the 1800s through to now, and all these different things that happen in York in the play speak to each other in a kind of rippling effect of the actions of the past affecting now.
Well, I guess looking at like a craft kind of question really is like, take us to sort of like, I guess the kernel of the idea and where you started with that and how you sort of developed it to where it is now. Like,
oh boy.
Well,
4 years.
Or
was it fully formed when you?
No.
Yeah,
it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, it's still going.
The conversation started around York in 2017 with Claire Watson and Chris, and then I jumped on board around mid-July 2017.
Yeah.
We had a dinner. Chris and I had never really met before. I was living in Melbourne at the time. Chris was here. And Claire was the new artistic director of Black Swan and was interested and really hungry to hear about stories that were happening around WA and the history of WA. And she came across York, she visited the town, and was starting to like just do little like searches of stories and histories that were of that place. And out of that came
the ghost stories.
The ghost stories of, you know, the York Hospital, and you know, a specific group of people that stayed there. And then from that, we found hundreds of accounts of people who stayed there. And then the other history of that was the colonial settlement invasion history, that which is the one that I feel is it's almost like York. The play could be set in any town in Australia. It feels very much like a microcosm for this country and history. But from 2017, it's literally just been lots of like Chris and I hanging out, and lots of emails and text messages and phone calls, just getting to know each other. We'd never worked together before. And so it was very much about just creating a relationship. It was very much about kind of like, I don't want to use the word like reconciling, but it was very much about understanding each other.
Yeah.
It was about understanding what we knew about our world, our experiences, and sharing them with each other, and sharing them with complete honesty and truth without judgment. And a lot of trips to York, a lot of Trove articles, a lot of like just hours and hours and hours of researching, and hours and hours and hours of conversations. And it's just taken so many different turns. And when we first wrote the draft, we thought we knew what it was about. And originally it was like a verbatim piece of theatre.
Yeah, we were going to do interviews was the plan. We were going to interview people who had stayed there with the ghost stories and make a verbatim piece about these ghost stories. But that wasn't a possibility at one point, so we had to move away from that. And we also had discovered more stories that didn't sort of fit with a verbatim piece, and we needed to sort of think about, well, how do the other stories fit? Because they were really important in speaking culturally to the nation, or to speaking of it as something bigger than just one town. And then we kind of had this idea of a play that started in the now and sort of kept going back in time to a point where you witnessed an event right at the beginning of the settlement of York that then makes these other things sit with a different view, that you then look back forward through time to now, and how everything sort of is viewed differently once you have that knowledge of a sort of a buried, hidden past.
Essentially, if we start to unearth the truth of this country's history and the darkness of it, we can never look at this country the same again. If we acknowledge it, we have to own it. And York is very much about that. It is, you can never look at the play once it fast forwards in time the same way after everything you've just seen.
And in terms of like, how did it form the current structure that it has today? You're saying it's still evolving, but what sort of structure would you say it's in currently?
Okay, well, it's a 2-act play. The first act deals with the present and then goes back to events in the 1980s. And the events in the 1980s sort of stop on a cliffhanger. And then when you come back in Act 2, we leave that cliffhanger hanging and we go to the 1910s in York. And then from the 1910s story being told, we jump to the 1800s story. And then after the 1800s, we skip back to the 1980s and then back to the now. And they're all told through things like there's the present as a character who is clairvoyant, so they start to see things in the 1980s, and so that drags us into there. The interval break drags us into the 1930s. An event of a First Nations person being chased by police takes us into the 1800s, and then the 1800s also formally, as far as a form goes, is much more a storytelling direct address to an audience where characters speak about the events that are happening to them and to other characters, and they narrate the story as opposed to a conversation of scene or dialogue like the other sections are. So every time we jump into different eras, we also jump into different style and different genre and different form.
So just talking about, I guess, Black Swan Theatre as a company and what it sort of does for the writers and the dramaturgs kind of coming in. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, for those people starting or wanting to kind of get into the theatre space, sort of how important those relationships are and how you start to form those relationships with a theatre company to then develop out work?
Mm. For myself, how I got here and how I got this opportunity to work on this play and to be a resident artist, I did a lot of independent theatre, which was just kind of it was about because I trained as an actor, and then was like, I'm not getting the work that I want, and so I started making my own work and started telling the stories I wanted to tell, and from that, then people started seeing it, and Claire Watson saw it. So for me, and I guess my advice for people is to, if you're not getting the work, and if you've got a story to tell, then tell it. And there's in the future, the spaces will open again, and we will be able to share stories. But for me, it was very much about being fed up with playing teenagers and wanting to tell stories that I thought were really important. And it all just happened really fast, and the right person saw it.
Yeah. So for people who are thinking about trying to get in contact with Black Swan, the best way to do it is invite Black Swan to see your shows.
Mm.
So like we started independently. I think everyone starts independently. Make the shows happen and then invite people to come and see it. And that's the best way for people to know you're out there. Black Swan doesn't accept scripts unsolicited. But if you have an agent who can put your script forward, then I think they're able to get it into the hands of the literary managers here.
Mm.
Polly,
Low.
Polly Low. I was good at Polly's. So yeah, then it's same as Ian. Make it yourself was what I did, and that sort of gets you in and noticed and be around.
Well, Chris, talking about, I guess, making it yourself, you're one of the founding members of Last Great Hunt, and you guys have won awards for many, many things right now. You very much work with different mediums. You've worked with puppetry, you've worked with projection. You really do kind of like play with media as well as theatre. Can you kind of talk about, I guess, the philosophy behind Last Great Hunt as a company? Or
yeah, sure. We're really, in 2 words, professional and playful is kind of what we like to put forward. We're a company that's there to serve the 6 artists immediately, but we also wanted to be something that serves artists first. We're an ensemble-led company, so we're definitely driven by artistic voice, and the decisions that the company makes come from very much the artistic core, with incredible support from our executive directors, executive producers, general managers, and whole staff team. But it is driven by artists, which is such a beautiful company to be a part of. As far as the shows go, we're very eclectic, like you say. And I think the philosophy is, if it works, it works. And to always try and approach things with a sense of, what about this or what about that, or interrogate how we can tell things. Sometimes it's a script and actors come in and act well and are directed well, and it happens, and that's beautiful. And sometimes there's no script and we devise it and make it from images and visual things. And sometimes it's got, puppetry or animations in it, or projection. Sometimes we use live cameras. We've been doing a lot of live camera work recently, which is sort of very conveniently been of benefit this year, going to an online digital sort of landscape. But all of those things are elements, and it's story and it's people that ultimately matter. It's what do we want to say, and how do these mechanisms help us say that? Or what do we want people to feel, and how do these mechanisms help people feel that? So I kind of, it's all performance, it's all story in my head, and for me it's all theatre. And whether it's visual theatre or literary text or spoken word or dance, it's all theatre. And theatre's always about that empathy training, or making you feel like you're in a group or a community, or that you're not alone, or that if there is something wrong, let's shift it and unsettle it a bit to kind of highlight it, so we can start to deal with it. It's still a game of just being with each other.
Well, I guess like on that, you guys made a production that went online on YouTube called Bad Baby Jane.
Yeah.
Now,
talk about that if you want.
Yeah, I'm gonna for those people who haven't seen it, I'm going to show a small little clip from it. It is online, and I'll put a link out in the notes below, so you guys can link to the video. But I'm going to show a small little clip from this, and maybe we can talk about it and yeah, and discuss. So here we go.
The names of her girls. So now it's her wedding day, and the priest is talking about marriage and duty and obedience, and all Jean can think about is Jake, and how much she loves him, and what a mistake she made. And maybe there's something in that kind of thinking, maybe something kind of magical, because I can feel something coming. And something tells me bad baby Jean feels it too.
Now I won't spoil who.
Oh
no, I won't spoil what happens. But with that performance, if you can't tell, like each performer is in a different state, or at least some performers were in Melbourne at the time, so some were in Sydney, and then a few were in Perth. Can you talk about? I guess it's such a. If people haven't seen it, again, I will put a link out for it. But can you talk about putting that show together, and in a time where at that time it was right at the height of COVID, when we were all in lockdown, and it was very much no one could leave their homes. So talk about how you guys put that together and really made a show like that happen.
Yeah, so I mean, like a lot of things that happened over COVID, there was a sudden spurt of all these opportunities that arose real quickly, for like, come and do this, or what about this, or let's pivot here, or let's do some digital content. So Google, the company Google, has like an arts development branch, and that arts development branch, we were going to do like a week, I think in September this year, with them in person, about like working with some tech and seeing whether that could be developed, or using tech to help create story kind of the way we do. But because of COVID, that sort of went put on hold. And when COVID hit, Google wanted to create this Google Sprint program, and they got a bunch of theatre companies around Australia. Griffin Theatre Company was one of them, and a few others, to essentially work online and try and use programs online to create little theatre or stories and that. And whatever we wanted to do with that, we could. And because we were on their radar with this development, it was meant to happen. They were like, hey, do you want to do this? So we had 3 weeks, and it was from scratch. We just kind of went, all right, what do we want to do? And we said, well, let's try and make something maybe filmic, but do it live, and do it from isolation. So there are 5 different filming locations that we all kind of plugged in and over the internet, source streamed it to one computer, and through that one computer's different variety of editing, processing power things, we were able, which is stuff that we had left over from a show called Lenore, that we did last year or 2 years ago. We had a lot of tech that allowed us to shortcut some of the difficulties of that. But the big thing was trying to get that and what we did live. So everything you saw there was done live in real time, cutting from one camera to the other. And that would be a combination of, I had 2 cameras in my space. And so I would have to cut to one of my cameras myself, and then the person who was the hub before it got streamed out live would have to cut from their camera as well to my camera. So my camera had 2 different channels, but to them it was only one camera in. It gets complex with the programs we used. We were doing it over Skype, and we were siphoning the NDIs from Skype into like a siphon program, and then trying to feed that into QLab. And then from QLab we were editing out and streaming, and then to get onto YouTube we had to do it through like a YouTube stream account thing. So yeah, there are complexities there with it, but really it was weird because it was a case of very unenjoyable performance, I have to say, where you kind of sit there and it's like, and now the bit's coming up, and then like you hear the noise and you just go, oh, and that's it, and then you have to quickly set for the next shot. And so it was breaking down into shot by shot thing, and so taking a very filmic approach to it because it was happening through camera was really big part of it. And then the other conversation we had around it was, well, how do we make the live experience more enjoyable? So then what you don't see on the YouTube video is that we had a foyer experience and a pre-show experience that people who wanted to talk to other people could chat during the show. And through the YouTube live stream, you could like talk and like ha 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 and clap and laugh. And we encouraged people to do that just so that they didn't feel like they were sitting in their rooms alone watching.
Well, in terms of like, it is such a cinematic experience, and Lenore as well, for those who have seen it, is such a real cinematic play, and it does sort of use this kind of cross technology. How do you feel the blend of filmic technology and theatre performance is going to come together in the future, or is it sort of on a case-by-case basis?
I think it's case by case, just real quick. That's where my mind goes. I don't think like digital streaming will replace theatre. I really don't. And I think it's about everything we said earlier, that theatre is being in the same room with people. And that's a pretty magical, wonderful thing. And that's been happening since people were walking the planet. Like it's gathering around a fire and storytelling and sharing those things is what I think is one of the parts of our DNA that separate us from other species. And I think it's a very important thing. And then theatre's got spiritual connections. Western theatre comes from religious forms and structures. And I suspect most other theatres have a similar basis to them as well. They're morality tales that were told to give across ethics and lessons to be taught to people. So theatre and gathering and listening to these things is ingrained with us so heavily that I think people will still be always going to gather. What a great thing to come out of it, as far as being able to develop ways of streaming work or getting work out there, is accessibility more than anything. Like allowing more people to see your work. It's not the same experience, but it is a way that they can engage with it and get to know you. For example, Gita, who's in The Last Great Hunt, was like, this is the first time my parents have really been able to see most of the work I do, because they live in Albany and they don't drive up for all the shows. And there is something quite wonderful about that. So I know at The Last Great Hunt, we're looking at in the future, when we do live shows and with an audience, how can we put a night on where we stream that out to regional venues or to Australia, so that our work can be shared with broader audiences, or just for people who don't have the accessibility to get to a theatre or don't want to necessarily go out to the city or sit in a theatre. Yeah, it's a strange balance, but theatres culturally are also very structured spaces, and what we can do to dismantle that and break that and kind of play with that sense is also very important too. And maybe there is something in this digital content that allows us to start chipping away at that.
Well, I have a question here, and this comes from Louise. In reference to something you mentioned, Chris, about inviting Black Swan Theatre to your productions. They were saying that they've put together some productions over the years and have invited Black Swan, but they've never attended. And the question really goes to, like, how do you get, you know, particular production companies, not just Black Swan, but other production companies, to really come to your shows? You can send out as many invites as you can, but is it really about knowing someone? Is it about putting on as many plays and getting some recognition for your stuff first, and then they'll come to your show? Like, talk a little bit about, I guess, your first interaction with that theater company that gave you your, I guess, the foot in the door.
Yeah. Well, the first foot in the door was the Blue Room Theatre for me, really, which is a wonderful organisation in Perth. And my first interaction with that was being brought into a show by people who needed someone to do something, and that was kind of when I was 17, and since then. In terms of Black Swan not coming to see the show, then that's an issue that Black Swan will have to address, and hopefully they can and we can as well. So do keep inviting Black Swan to the shows, please, and trying to make sure that we can get out to see as much. I think with a Black Swan hat on, with a Last Great Hunt hat on, and I think all theatre companies in Perth, there's a responsibility that if you are in a place of employing artists and employing writers, to make the effort to go out and be a part of that conversation and see it. It's a part of the job to be in that world. So hopefully we can change that.
Yeah, I think, and at the moment we're in a process of just figuring out how the best way and kind of with the resources that the company does have to be able to send people out to see shows who are representatives of the company. So a lot of the time it has been on the artistic director or the literary manager or the company manager to see work. But now we're kind of shifting that there's a possibility that resident artists can
it'll be us.
Yeah, because, you know, as resident artists, we meet every single week and we talk about shows that we've seen. We talk about shows we've read, plays we've read, sorry, and talk about theatre that's happening around the world and around the country. And so those conversations always very much feed into programming and conversations in general about the industry and the future of theatre and the present of theatre. So I think as a company, we're just shifting the way in which we can use all the resources and the people that we have.
The other thing to say is invite not just artists from companies, but invite general managers and executive directors as well, and the producers, because they're often the people who keep tabs on who's around. And like, what's Chantel's role here at Black Swan?
She's a company manager.
Yeah, company manager. Like she's the one who's got the list of all the actors who have been employed by Black Swan for forever and ever. And yeah, it's invite the not just artists' roles. The theatre has such a broad collective of people.
Yeah, and I think also, I think there's always a very much a stress on artists making independent theatre to invite the main stage theatre companies, to invite critics, to invite, you know, the gatekeepers or the people who are in the big roles. But actually, sometimes you know, I speak for myself and for Chris too, and a lot of people who in this industry who direct, write, act. Sometimes one person will see your show, or you will meet somebody in passing, and then that's just like that relationship is the people you make work with for the rest of your career sometimes.
Yeah.
I met my friends and collaborators, Penny Harpham and Sienna Van Helton, who run She Said Theatre Company in Melbourne, because I worked at a box office. And so it wasn't even about inviting people, it was just about connecting with people, and not just main stage companies, but just connecting with other artists.
Well, I guess probably let's look at theatre as a broader sort of sense, and the representation of voices on stage that we have. We've had Daniel Monks win an award recently, and look, we love Daniel here in Perth. But could you talk about, I guess, seeing yourself on stage and what that kind of does for your identity of wanting to then be an actor or be a writer, and kind of talk to that. I guess for us as writers, like, how much do we do we write for that representation, or do we cast for the representation? Is it an issue with the writing, or is it an issue with the casting? How do we move forward?
Do you want to talk about scene stuff?
Yeah. Representation, if you can see it, you can be it. And I think for myself, the reason why I made work and told the stories I wanted to tell was because I wasn't seeing my stories. I wasn't seeing people who looked like me on stage. And I think, where does it come from? I think it's not just a theatre problem, but it's very much a country. It's the way in which our world exists. There's reasons why we don't hear about the stories that are from my community. Or I guess I'm saying, like, we just need to let people who need to tell stories, give them space, give them time. I don't think we have to fix it. I don't think we can fix it. I think it will be something that has to happen, but it needs time and it needs care. But, you know, even just thinking about COVID and seeing the amount of theatre that I saw online, and I didn't realise until after 3 months just how many white bodies that I'd seen on stage, and actually how much that kind of reverted my experience of seeing theatre as a theatre goer. You know, I think I always make an effort to see the work from people of colour and from diverse backgrounds. And over the past couple of years, that's something that's been happening more and more, and it's been quite progressive. But then seeing theatre online, it actually, regressed, I feel like, the progression of inclusivity. I don't know if I don't have the answer. For me, I think very much that we need to have bigger conversations about our communities and our country that will then speak to theatre and et cetera, but I don't think it's a fix.
Yeah, I think Ian's right on that it's time. Time is really important, and it will take time. I think as far as being a white writer, there are characters that I would need to do a lot of work to write. And if I want to write a character with a racial identity or different to mine, then my responsibility is to do a bucket load of work on that. That doesn't mean I can or should, but I think the responsibility to the truth is to do the research. And the research is about going to community. And then even after doing all that research, I still might not be able to write that character. And that's just a reality of personal experience and the context in which we're writing in and the world in which we're writing in. With York, the moment we knew that there were going to be First Nations characters in it was the moment we had to have the conversation about First Nations writer being not like consultant or something, but no, co-writer, and definitely on the same level. And also the conversation of making sure there was a First Nations director involved and First Nations cast members who represented themselves, the country of the characters which they're playing. And that it becomes a very important thing. And even just recently, Australian Council just released a document about best practices in terms of working on First Nations Indigenous work and the cultural kind of copyright issues of that and the representation conversations that are happening, which is a very long document, but a wonderful resource. My intuition at this moment is, if you want to do it, I don't want to tell a writer you can't do it, but boy, you got to do a lot of work for it, like a lot of work. And you can't, like, if you're going to do it, recognize the responsibility and the amount of work that it might take. And I mean, it might take years more work to get yourself into a position where you can write that character truthfully and honestly and with a fair representation, and also have the authority to write that character from the community which you're writing about. And that in a way, from a pure writer's perspective, that should be the case for all the characters we write. Like, no matter whether it's a racial difference, to me, every time I write a female character, if I'm writing a woman who's 80 years old, like, I need to at least go and speak to an 80-year-old woman and maybe try and understand their world. If I write a character who is an immigrant from Southeast Asia, then, you know, maybe I should be going and talking to the community of Southeast Asian immigrants. And then the next level of depth, it's really complex, is, well, what is my intention? Like, what am I doing by doing that? Am I, like, what are my motives behind wanting to tell that story, and to really interrogate the motives of why you want to tell that person's story. Because if the reason you want to tell that person's story is for your own self-benefit, that's dangerous. That's really, you have to have it come from a place of that the story is a universal one, or that is something to be shared, or if your reconciliation is built in with theirs, then there is a path maybe that you can walk down. But all of that stuff, it takes so much time. And I didn't know how much time York was going to take. And we've been really grateful for the amount of time we've been afforded on it. But the lesson from it has been, particularly, we were saying this the other day, that what a wonderful gift of collaboration and time we've been given. Yeah.
Well, I guess moving forward with theatre in, you know, the late stages of 2020, 2021 and moving forward, how is theatre going to change now that we've had this COVID? Or do we feel that it's not going to change?
No, I think it's always changing. I mean, I know for a fact a lot of programming is conversations around positive work. And, you know, let's make something that's full of hope and sharing and happiness and joy because of the times that we're in, and potentially the times we might be facing in the next year or two, economically speaking. Yeah, I know there's that sort of talk. I think there's a lot of talk around community-based work, like work that engages an audience or is audience-driven, or has audience members involved in the performance, like events. Kind of, you go and you don't just sit in a theatre, or work that goes out to groups or to somewhere that's not a traditional theatre, and you're watching it in a different space, which isn't new to theatre, but I think it's particularly, for a while there, everything was trying to see, can we perform outside? Because of the COVID restrictions being based around whether you're outside or inside, there was a lot of talk around, oh, let's make the performance happen outside, because you can fit 400 people in a little amphitheatre, but in the theatre you can only fit 100, that sort of question.
Yeah. I think that thing of representation too kind of leads into this thing of what the world has been through and what we've all been through has not just affected one group of people. And so I hope for the future of theatre is that we start cracking open all of those other stories that we haven't heard before, and we start seeing the world as a whole, and not just very specific pockets of groups of people. And I think what I hope, that thing of empathy that theatre does for people is hopefully coming out of all of this, we've gained a lot more empathy for each other, and we can look to each other to offer some support in telling your story, rather than I've got this idea, I want to tell this story, maybe it's not mine, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's like, well, why am I telling the story? I think is a big question when you write any stories. Why am I doing it? But I hope that we start to see stories that represent the world and lots of people.
Well, I mean, there's I did read recently that they're doing The Big Boss in Noongar. They're translating the
Bruce Lee.
So, I mean, lovely to see more Indigenous languages on screen, and we've had the Shakespeare play as well. Was it Hamlet, I believe? Yep. So, I mean, more stuff like that. Where talk about like things that you know that are coming up in the future that you might want to guide people towards to see, especially like not just in WA, but shows that are around the country.
Yeah, I don't even really like. I only know what I'm doing at the moment. But I think regardless of COVID, I think as an industry, we were very much being very progressive in inclusive storytelling, and I hope that just continues. And I think there are, you know, wonderful projects like Hecate and people at Mughal and Ilbidri and Yuriakin who are just...
Oh, FIFO, Yuriakin's coming up.
Yeah, FIFO, Yuriakin's coming up.
Go see shows at Yuriakin. Like, they're a fantastic company. They're one of the only funded Indigenous companies in Australia. Like, it's incredible that we've got that resource here in Perth. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that we just... I know people will be concerned about going back into sitting in theatres with people, but I really hope we just like start to grab it again and really want to just sit with people again.
Well, I guess like ending on a little bit of hope here. Can you tell us sort of, I guess, when you feel like York might be ready for us to see, if you could even tell us that? If you can't, that's okay. Or what you're sort of working on right now, going on into the future, whether they have release dates or not.
Well, York hopefully at some point in the near future. It's all like sort of been arranged and disseminated when we might be able to return to it, hopefully. We will know publicly in a month.
November.
Yeah. You get to go to Sydney. You're going to do AD ship in Sydney.
Yeah. So I'm to be over to Sydney soon to work on a show. But like everything is still waiting for things to be announced. All of the things that I was meant to do this year, still waiting to see if they will happen next year. But in terms of projects, I'm looking at just what's the next thing, what's the next challenge I want. And, you know, those things aren't commissions or anything that are locked in yet, but they're just ideas that I would like to work on. But the same as lots of people just waiting for the day where you can announce them.
Yeah.
Just everything, lots of things are on hold at the moment.
The Last Great Hunt's we're going to do a return to Bad Baby Jean in end of October, November at Pika, and we're going to also be streaming that live. So we're going to continue the experiment of theatre, but also streaming. So we'll only have a small audience because of restrictions in Pika, but we're also going to take what we're doing in front of this audience and try and get it out online while we do it every night.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. I'd like to thank Ian and Chris for coming down and talking to us all about theatre. Thank you so much, guys. Good luck with York. And hopefully we'll see you soon on the theatre circuit.
Thank you,
Thanks
Aaron.
so much.
Thanks for having us.
Everybody.
Thanks, guys. Take care.